Hello everyone, so here's just a quick video update for April 6th. I did read the discussion postings on the chapter on transformations, and I also of course read and graded your tests, test 2, which were pretty good for the most part. I think for a few people there's still a little bit of confusion about form and function, so I'm just going to say a word about that. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about transformations and a little bit about preposition stranding, just to kind of add to some of what was um, being bandied about in the discussion board. So, um, right. So, first to form and function. Essentially, form is the lexical um, category or the phrasal category that we're dealing with. So, a noun is a form, um, and a noun phrase would be a form, a preposition is a form, prepositional phrase is a form. Most of what we're doing when we draw these syntactic trees, that's all form. Function is more like what the element, what its purpose is, what it does in the next higher node in a syntactic tree. So if we're looking at a noun in a noun phrase, its function, although the form is a noun, its function would be a head word, for example, or head of a noun phrase. Um, if we have something like um, an entire noun phrase, well, you might have a noun phrase when we're talking about form. Its function might be something like a subject of the sentence or a direct object. So things like that subjects, direct objects, complements. These are all functions, whereas nouns, verbs, noun phrases, verb phrases, and so on are all form. Now, it's also possible for one form category to function as another form category. Uh, so for a verb to function as a noun, right? For example, to swim obviously is a verb, and we can have a form like swimming. Well, that can function as a noun if we say something like swimming is my favorite sport, for example. Then in that case, we've got one form actually functioning as another form class. So it can get a little bit confusing. But essentially, the simplest way to think of it is the form is what the category is, and the function is what it does. Okay, so a little bit about preposition stranding. Some of you talked about that in the discussion board, meaning just kind of leaving a preposition at the end of a sentence. And now, a lot of people who have a prescriptivist kind of mindset will tell you it's just incorrect, you should never do it. But the fact is, English does allow it. So it's also, interestingly enough, it's allowed in Swedish. So Swedish has preposition stranding. I didn't realize that until I started studying Swedish a few years ago. But Swedish does it as well. Now, people will tell you you shouldn't strand your prepositions, and there's all these jokes like anyway, I'm not going to tell you one of those jokes, but they'll say you shouldn't strand a preposition at the end of a sentence. It's just incorrect. But if you have a sentence like, is that the guy Mary said she was going to the party with, there's not really another way to do it um, without straining the preposition. Because if you say something like, is that the guy with whom Mary said she was going to the party, it actually means something different. That means Mary and that guy together at the same time said, we're going to the party, right? That would be with whom she said she was going to the party. That's different than, is that the guy Mary said she was going to the party with. Now, of course, you could use a different verb altogether and say something like, is that the guy Mary said she would accompany to the party? But there's really no sense in it. Um, Okay, now transformations. Just a little bit about the general purpose of transformations. It's, if you think about the deep structure and think about your mental lexicon, ideally what we want to do is model that in a way where what's happening mentally is as simple as possible, right? So um, if we think of our mental lexicon and we consider a verb like walk, well, are we going to say we have a separate entry for walk, walks, walking, and walked? Or is it just going to be one lexical entry with four, um, well, three possible endings and then a zero ending? Well, the latter makes more sense in terms of economy of grammar if you think about one lexical entry and then adding suffixes to it, right? Rather than a separate lexical entry for each possible form. So when you multiply that by all the verbs in the language, your mental lexicon would be rather unwieldy if you had a separate entry for each possibility. It's similar when we talk about transformations. The idea is to simplify the deep structure, simplify what's going on in the mind, and then just apply transformations to get the surface form we want for various kinds of effects, right? So if we have an underlying form of a passive, and then an underlying form for negative, underlying form for the active voice, um, it gets a lot more unwieldy than if we just say we've got the simplified deep structure, and then it's generally going to be in the active voice is how we think about it, and then we can apply a transformation for a negative, for a question, WH question, yes no question, or for a passive, that sort of thing. So it kind of simplifies what's going on in deep structure and in the mental lexicon. Okay, well, I think that's going to be about it for now, but keep an eye out. I will be posting another video probably at the end of this week or the beginning of next week after you've talked a little bit about the chapter on variation and the chapter, well, Dennis Preston's article on folk dialect maps. All right. Okay, then. Take care. I'll talk to you later and stay safe.